Hello and welcome everyone to today's program. My name is Kelly Hummerkrauser. I'm the Manager of Education here at Main Street America, and today we have a program from Main Street America and UrbanMain along with our partners at Streetsense. We're very pleased to bring you around Main Street America, UrbanMain Restaurants in Recovery. We want to make sure that you get the most out of today's program, so I'd like to just momentarily make sure that you understand your control panel. You do have the option to use either computer or phone audio. You can click the audio panel on your control panel to choose that option. You can also use the questions function to chat with us at any time, whether it's just a question about making sure that you are connected or making sure that you are getting the most out of the presentation relative to a specific question for one of our presenters. Please note that the handout of this presentation will be posted momentarily in the handout section, and you do as well have the option to come back and review this later as a recording. It will be posted on our COVID-19 resource page, Main Street Forward, later today or early tomorrow, and we do encourage you to go back and review any materials here. I also want to encourage you to reach out to our presenters as resources to make sure that you are able to assist your restaurants in whatever phase of recovery they find themselves. Today, first I want to introduce Dion Bowe, the Director of UrbanMain, who will talk about kind of putting this whole presentation into the Main Street perspective for our commercial corridor managers. So Dion, welcome and take it away.
Hey, Kelly. I'm so sorry, guys. I was unmuted. Hey, Kelly, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you're here with us. As Kelly mentioned, I'm Dion Bowe, the Director of UrbanMain. I know many of you have worked with a lot of you. Today, as we go into this presentation on Main Street America and UrbanMain Restaurants in Recovery, I think I would be remiss in not mentioning the riots that have taken place over the past 5 days in many of our communities, particularly in our distressed corridors. And as we were going into this webinar, I really wanted this to make certain that this was timely and this was a resource that you all could utilize. And I think it is. I mean, many of our communities are going through, phases of disaster. And the first phase that we've seen this year in 2020 was the pandemic, COVID-19. And now many of our communities are definitely going through another phase of civil unrest. And you've heard from us several times since the onset of COVID-19, being prepared. How do you respond, recovering, and mitigation? It's almost as if we're starting all over again, right, with the past 5 days of the riots. And preparedness is something that is very important. The education, outreach, the training, the emergency management and planning, but being prepared to ensure that you have the trust of your community, right? We've seen we've seen the expressions of pain that folks are experiencing and have seen, in our country of people of color. And we're seeing these expressions in positive protests, but we are seeing it in the civil unrest and the property damage. And so how are we able to respond? By responding to those that feel like they haven't been a part of the process right now, as well as making certain that our businesses are able to recover. I have here response, right? Search and rescue, protection of life, and it's protection of life and property damage assessment and cleanup. Many of you are going through that right now. You're assessing the property. You're looking at, how your businesses have been impacted. Your cleanups are happening. I've seen a number of news reports from Milwaukee to Chicago where folks are coming out to clean up. But from there, how do we recover, right? Develop and implement a post-disaster recovery path. This is not only COVID-19. We are really thinking about the riots also, the recovery path, rebuilding efforts, mitigating. How does this happen again? So really reducing vulnerabilities, adjustment to building codes and land use. Again, I feel a little uncomfortable talking about adjusting to building codes and land use when we're talking about civil unrest, but to the point of this webinar and the good information that you're going to hear from the Streetsense team, we need to make certain that this is brought up. You do need to think about building codes and land use as you're thinking about mitigation. States reopening. So again, we completed these slides last week. and it was truly about how to best guide our communities through reopening. And I will focus there. And as this is credit to the New York Times, where they're showing the number of states that either have already reopened, where we see the majority of states have reopened. Where I am in Illinois, we are taking a regional approach to reopening because we are one of the hot spots, and most of the hot spots are those regional reopening spots. And then, just completely still shut down. As effective May 29, 2020, it looked like the state of New Jersey was still shut down. So as many of our, restaurants are moving to curbside pickup, they were once sit-down restaurants, and now it's delivery and takeout only. How do you help them as they are guiding through the process, as guidelines are being set by each state or each city for these restaurants to reopen? How do you guide them through the process and make certain that you're giving them the most up-to-date information? Before introducing Jay with the Streetsense team, we had a conversation last week, and I'm going to steal your quote, Jay, but he made mention that there are all of these policies that are coming out, reopening guidelines to help and serve our businesses, but sometimes the government officials don't get the memo of how difficult this may be for businesses, how they're creating additional barriers where it may take a week for them to reopen, or they just are not set up to reopen in the way that the guidelines are mentioned. So your roles are so vitally important to being able to serve as the translator between policymakers and the businesses and the residents that you're serving every day. So, the challenges that our small businesses are facing, our distressed neighborhoods can be overlooked, right? City governments really often focus a lot on their central business districts and really want to highlight that shining gem. That's the place that most tourists go to, the place that most leaders, if you're coming in town for business, this is the place that most individuals are going to. They're not going into our neighborhoods. So when cities are thinking about funding and how to support particular funding, particularly in the wake of COVID-19 and most recently the riots, our neighborhoods can sometimes be overlooked. So we really need those champions to always be at the table talking. Factors contributing to neighborhood blight are exasperated by the disasters. So COVID-19, we've heard that many of our small businesses, many of them would close, may not reopen within 2 months because of COVID-19. Now with this new, with the civil unrest that is happening, there is like large scale property damage. Folks have lost their products. This is exacerbating the problem. So this is like a double bang for many of these communities. Our businesses are, sometimes see really a very hard time seeing a vision and the potential for revitalization. They're in the midst of this. They're in the midst of it. They're dealing with the factors of their businesses closing, of not making the bottom line. So they're really having a very hard time to be able to look up and see those big ideas. They're thinking about what now? What can my business do? How can I remain open? How can I remain sustainable? And they may not have the capacity to deal with rebuilding and redevelopment. Some are having challenges with navigating the new market reality. I've talked to some managers that are having challenges with navigating to new market realities, understanding that COVID-19, we really need to ensure that our businesses have the technical savviness that they need to be able to survive. But some businesses are really having a hard time shifting, as well as managers. And the need to work on mitigating, measures, hardening the efforts in vulnerable areas. What can our businesses do to make certain that they are able to be resilient after these types of disasters? Our businesses are not planning to continue. They lack a plan to continue operations. Some are underinsured or have no insurance, right? So we all know that, there are some instances that if there's a natural disaster, those businesses may not receive, insurance payouts. Civil unrest, they may not receive, insurance payouts. So it's really understanding the type of insurances that our businesses have and ensuring that they have the right insurance to support them in the time of disasters. Some may have, a really hard time connecting to financial and technical resources for recovery. So access to PPE equipment, assisting redesigning in spaces. Again, this is what the focus of this webinar will be on. How are we helping our restaurateurs really look at redesigning their spaces in the wake of a pandemic? And many lack the knowledge to deal with new post-disaster realities. It's really going back to the first slide that I mentioned, that they're just not thinking about how to shift their business operations to operate in this new post-reality. We've all heard the word, there's a new normal, the new normal, we're operating from this new normal. But what does it mean for our businesses? And some of them have a hard time really, acknowledging and working on that. So we have to help them. And in your role as a Main Street manager or commercial district manager or SSA manager or bid administrator, how are you working to help your businesses? And there are many hats you play. We know that. One of your hats is the analyst and the educator to your small businesses. Distributing business recovery guides. Many of you are seeing the guides that are coming out of your state. Some of them are coming out locally. Many of you are at the table helping develop these recovery guides with your local municipalities and cities. So ensuring that you're getting that word out to your businesses that you're serving. Really looking at the impacts of long-term viability of businesses and industries. Industries may change. What business was vibrant this year may not be vibrant in 2021 or is completely closed in 2020. So it's really we're really starting to think about the shifts in the industry and how can we help our businesses along the way and keep them involved with us if they are willing to shift. Really being able to facilitate accurate communications and for response and recovery. There was one alderman here in the city of Chicago that really wanted to ensure, Matt O'Shea, that he was communicating to his businesses and that there were rumors that were being spread or, inaccurate information to the businesses as well as to the residents. So being sure that you have vetted the information and you're sharing accurate information on response and recovery, really providing that cost and benefit analysis of recovery projects. So how do you help your businesses really understand that? You're the visionary, you're the catalyst as well. You're envisioning how the community can come back together stronger. I've mentioned, the civil unrest. I've mentioned the pandemic. How are we building trust? How are we building pride at the community levels that it can come back stronger? And this is a new opportunity. I realize that it is very hard. We all are. I am extremely overwhelmed. I can only imagine how overwhelmed you all are in your roles. So, I've been thinking about how can we bring our communities back where there is pride, there is ownership, there is now development happening from within. So how do you become that visionary and that catalyst to bring folks together? Creating a strategic plan that is embraced by the community is so vitally important now in our communities. The communities do not feel a part right now. This is the reason for this unrest. They do not feel like their voices have been heard. They have not been included at the table. How are we ensuring that happens moving forward? And really garnering their input. I don't care if it's an 8-year-old. You want to garner their input and support for critical recovery initiatives. Everyone in our communities have value, and we have to hear from them. You're the connector, you're the advocate. I talked about a little bit earlier that the government officials may not have gotten the memo, but you did. You're talking to the businesses, you're receiving the phone calls, you're making the telephone tree calls to check in on your businesses. You know directly what's going on. So you're able to connect those public and private resources to build back better and ensure that it's being built by the community and to represent the businesses that are in your community. You're communicating the priorities and the need for policy changes. Who knows best than the people that are working with these businesses on a day-to-day basis? You should be at the table, really advocating for those policy changes to state, I would also say city and federal leaders, You're seeking funding opportunities for recovery efforts. There's been so many opportunities that are coming out, and I understand that it is overwhelming to be able to sift through all of those things, but really honing in on what your respective area and the number of grants that are coming out to support your local entrepreneurs, your property owners. It is to your benefit to know, particularly for your area, state, federal, and city. And you are also serving as that gap filler, right? You're filling the gaps to assist with short and long-term financing gaps. Any event that you have an SSA or a bid where you may be able to shift the funds to be able to support your small businesses, or if you have funding that is coming in from a particular foundation, how can you shift the funding from those foundations to immediately respond to the needs of your businesses, or make connections to community development financial institutions or local community banks that are interested in funding, or corporations for that matter. You're providing that business recovery assistance and services. Since COVID-19, I have seen so many managers busy at work on behalf of their local cities. Some have received increase in funding because they have the trust, they have the relationships already to be able to reach into these businesses where they've developed and they've helped these businesses in the past, and these businesses find that you are that trusted resource where they can go get information. You're also developing programs and initiatives as needed to support long-term recovery. So again, your partnerships with your cities, your county, your state, and the federal government is very important for you to be able to help develop programs that may fit your community, but also may be a citywide effort. So being at the table with those policymakers, with those funders, because again, remember, your asset is knowing what's happening minute by minute on the ground with the businesses that you're serving. So here are just a few short and long-term strategies. It's good to develop a post-disaster neighborhood redevelopment plan. How do you recover? Improve, rebrand the neighborhood image. Oh my goodness, as I'm thinking about the riots, just like billboards of community pride, of community ownership, how can we continue to rebuild, and not only rebuild for outsiders, but rebuild for the people that live in the community so they can have some level of pride. When you have pride and ownership, you don't destroy what's yours. Use of development government relationships to assist in pioneering legislation of programs. I've talked about this at length. There's no need for me to really go in deep, but really understanding your power of your relationships that you have with the businesses and being able to sit at the table with your government relationships, even if that's your council person, your alder person, your city commissioner, who do you have the relationships with that can really foster moving forward legislation or programming that will benefit your communities, and connecting businesses to resources to help guide reopening in a comprehensive way. So we're talking about restaurant reopening today. We invited Jay Caudron from Streetsense to join us as we, took a look at their restaurant reopen toolkit. I think it's been one of the most comprehensive toolkits that I've seen thus far produced. And we really wanted Jay to talk from his perspective as the managing director of the Eat and Drink team. Before I turn it over to Jay, I just want to read his bio very quickly because he has a lot of experience in this work and I think is a great resource to us. As the managing director of the Eat and Drink studio, Jay coordinates the activities of a team of talented industry experts on projects that include concept visioning and development, operational analysis and oversight, and full concept implementation. Jay has spent over 30 years in the restaurant and hospitality sector and has served as the managing director for Dean & DeLuca, global brand leader for Edition Hotels, VP of Lifestyle Brands for Marriott International, and has held key leadership roles at iconic properties such as the Inn of Venezia, I'm probably really butchering that up, at La Maison del Rio, and the Inn at Little Washington. As an independent restaurateur, Jay has developed concepts in Santa Fe, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jay Cauldron with Streetsense.
Thank you, Dion, and thank you, Kelly. And I want to thank UrbanMain and Main Street America for giving us the opportunity to speak to you all today. You know, as Dion mentioned, with all of the unrest happening in all of our communities all over the country, combined with the global and long-term impacts of the pandemic, it's just a really incredibly difficult and challenging situation for the small businesses in our communities, and they're struggling. And you know, the second that this pandemic hit, our team went to work on putting together and culling through all of the resources and CDC guidelines and customer service strategies and new business strategies that we could find to support restaurants through this process. And so what we wanted to talk about today, really, we wanted to talk a little bit about where we are in the market, some operational adjustments that restaurants can make in the community to help support their businesses and to respond to the pandemic. Some messaging and communications that restaurants should be thinking about, and how they maintain their brand and you know, maintain the connection with their community and the people in their localities. And then we'll briefly tee up for the group on the phone here today some new business models and some diversification models that we're advising restaurants to, you know, look at to help, you know, use the facility that they have to generate money in this post-pandemic world. Because the reality is that the business that we saw before 2 months ago and in 2019 is just not coming back in the same way that anyone's going to expect. We're encouraging all of our partners, all of our clients, and all the businesses that we talk to act like a startup and an independent, and really look at the ways that they can make money in any way they can to survive this pandemic until they get back on their feet, until the business comes back, and then the world returns to some type of new normal. And then we'll talk a little bit about the technology resources and hopefully have a little time for Q&A. The document that we have provided to Main Street America and UrbanMain is a pretty comprehensive. It's about 75 pages, and it really goes into detail. I will not bore you with all that stuff on the call today, but I'm going to go over some of the high-level strategies and things that we're talking to our restaurants about. So where are we today? It's grim. It's grim in the industry in a way that we've never seen before in the history of this country. About 8 million restaurant employees have been laid off or furloughed. That's an enormous amount. The industry has lost to date about 90 billion in sales, and restaurants are down. Quick service restaurants, QSRs, are down about 60%. Full service restaurants are down about 75% in business. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. And the other sort of unfortunate piece of this is that many of the recoveries from previous pandemics in Asia and other places around the world have been a very sharp decline followed by a very sharp return to business. If you can imagine that being a shape of like a V, where you drop the business down and it hits bottom and then it goes immediately back up and goes very quickly to pre-pandemic levels. We're not seeing it like a V for this one. This is more like a Nike swoosh, and it goes down very far and then gently and carefully and slowly comes back. And that's about a 12 to 18 month process. So in addition to all the unrest, in addition to all the chaos, in addition to all of the things that are happening in our communities, this pandemic is not going away, and it's not a short-term fix. So our team worked together to pull together strategies and ideas about what can you do, not only to reopen and to reopen with less seats, but how do you survive the loss of business, the loss of top-line revenue, the lack of customers, the less seating, and all of that. And how do you do that for the next 12 to 18 months? So we're going to share some strategies with you today that we've been sharing with our partners and clients, and that are outlined in the toolkit that you can download and share with the people in your community, and certainly send them to the link and send them to our online resources as well. So Dion actually shared with you what's open. I think hers is a little bit more recent than mine, but we look at it a little bit more like what's at what capacity and what's opening. And Restaurants are allowed to open and are reopening in a lot of different markets. The worst outcome of this for us would be that people get scared, that the cases of COVID-19 skyrocket, and then people have to backtrack on those reopening plans. We can deal with a slow and steady reopening strategy and a steadily increasing business. I think that restaurants and businesses will have a much harder time dealing with a slow, gentle reopening and then a return to social distancing and quarantining and shutdowns. That will send a lot of businesses into bankruptcy, and that's not a good thing. So, we're advocating as much as we can to have businesses be careful and really think about, how they reopen and when. The good news is that for the past, 7-8 weeks, there has been a steady decline in people who are concerned about going out and going to restaurants. We're seeing restaurants in places like Houston, Charleston, and in Florida, when they reopen, and if they're able to use some adjacent space to make up for some of the social distancing parameters that they're required to enact, we're seeing the business get to about 50% of pre-COVID levels relatively quickly in some of these more urban communities. And that's because there's a real pent-up desire to get back into these restaurants and these very essential parts of our community. So the demand is there. We're also seeing restaurants, extend their hours of operation so they can take more people in a night for dinner, for example. We're seeing them open at 4 and be packed at 4, social distance packed, which means about 25 or 30% of total occupancy, but full to capacity that they can serve at 4, and then extending that to 11 p.m. at night. But what we're seeing is a steady and slow return of consumer confidence, and we're seeing people that are willing to get back into the world of restaurants and people really hungering to do that. The trick is that restaurants have such thin margins, as everyone on the call I'm sure knows. I mean, we're dealing with sometimes low teens and high single digits at best in many communities for the profit margin. And so opening at 25% of capacity, it just is a recipe for losing a bunch of money. And so we are advising our restaurants and our clients to be very careful and understand their break-even points and pick the right time to reopen. Just because you can reopen may not mean the business in your community is back. And so working with your community and the businesses in your community to be very careful about the timing of their reopening is going to save a lot of businesses in the very near term. And then we work with our businesses and in the community. I think it's essential for these restaurants to know, what's your break-even point? When can you begin to make money or stay afloat? And how much business do you need to do to achieve that? And we're telling these restaurants to be very transparent with their jurisdictions and their local communities, because they need help. If they're going to be required to do social distancing within the confines of their restaurants, they're going to need access to public space. They're going to need access to streets. They're going to need access to things that are taking place in the community, communal areas and parklets and things like that. These are all really important. But it's very important to understand what the break even is and how they can make money and when to get back in the pool. The other thing that we're advising our restaurants on is making sure they have a war chest of capital. A lot of restaurants exist on such slim margins. They've done one raise of capital when they opened, and they've never thought about it again because their doors have always been open and they've always been able to make money, from day to day, week to week, and month to month. Well, it's probably now necessary for them to go out and find new sources of funding, support, capital, and build a little bit of a war chest so that they can, survive the next 12 to 18 months for whatever happens and any increasing social distancing measures or any other hits like we're seeing, or social unrest or anything else that may assail their business. It's important for them to have the capital, to have new sources of capital, and to know how long it's going to last. As people get back into the world, the PPE that the government, not the PPE, the PPP, the government COVID-19 legislation, was written in such a way that people thought this was a 2-month thing to deal with. And I think they're fixing it now, and they're extending the time that businesses can use to spend the money that they get from the PPP and extend the time that they can spend that money and the way that they can spend that money so they don't have to pay it back and it turns into a grant next year. These are very important things for businesses to understand. And there's a lot of opportunity out there for funding in some ways, but there's also a lot of pitfalls. And so it's important to understand how they have to spend their money, how they have to be compliant with these loans that they're getting, so they don't have to pay them back next year and see further rounds of bankruptcies and closures because people got in too deep with some of the funding mechanisms. As people come back into the market, staffing is important, and bringing people back in the right way and taking care of them as they get back to business. The reality is that businesses in your community are not going to be able to hire everyone back immediately because there's just no business for those people to serve. And so you can't hire back a staff of 50 or 60. You're probably going to hire back a staff of 8, 10. And then as the business grows, you'll incrementally rehire more. That's the reality of what's going on in the industry. And despite the legislation and the COVID-19 legislation, that's what's going to happen. And that's the way restaurants are going to behave, because that's the only way they're going to be able to survive. We are advising our restaurant partners not to race to the bottom with wages and with turnover and with any of that nonsense. We're saying, really solidify the great team and the people you've had and the people who have helped you build your business, and find new ways to get them back to work as quickly as you can. So anything that you've outsourced in the past, we're saying bring that in-house, whether it's cleaning or maintenance or sweeping the front of the building. It's let's bring that back in the house, put some of your own people back to work, and get our communities back to work as quickly as we can, but also responsibly. From operational adjustments, it's a different world for diners, and it's a different world for restaurants. I think you're going to see a lot of digital menus and QR codes, and you're going to see smaller menus, and you're going to see restaurants focusing on their best sellers and things, because that's where the higher margins are, and that's where they're going to be able to make their money. So what we've learned from the studies that we've done and working with Datalytics and other agencies is that restaurants, people are willing to be a little bit inconvenienced in restaurants right now. In fact, they're willing to be very flexible to get these restaurants back open and what they're willing to do. So having smaller menus and having more focused options is perfectly fine right now. You're going to see a less interactive service model. Tableside service and the sort of fawning, putting a napkin on the lap and opening a menu is just not going to happen anymore. And there's going to be a lot of touch-free processes and technology that are going to be employed. Helping your restaurants, understand what these are, and the people in your community understand what these options are, whether it's a QR code placed in the center of the table that gives you your phone the ability to look at the menu, or actually payment that is remote and touchless. All these are going to be things that consumers are going to want coming back into the new market. Communities are going to need pickup and delivery and really think through this with their restaurants and their communities, because this is going to be a big a significant part of them diversifying their business to get back into the market. And pickup and curbside delivery requires a place to do that, and it requires the traffic flow and the clarity from the local community of how they want that to happen. Not doing it is going to be very difficult for these businesses to survive. So our local Main Street managers and bids and CIDs and all of the people that we're talking to, we're saying help them with the public space activation, help them with the access to parking spaces in front of their businesses, help them get through some of these obstacles so that they can activate some of these revenue generating strategies. And from pickup and delivery, we're also seeing lots more on sanitation and sanitizing wipes and all those things that help people feel comfortable in doing business with a restaurant remotely. And then the tamper-resistant packaging is another important thing for restaurants that we're seeing. People just want to feel comfortable that it went from the stove to their plate without a lot of people being able to touch it. Social distancing is it's a tricky thing. It's going to be difficult for a lot of businesses to get this done. Having things not only just 6 feet away, but pathways for service and pathways for people being seated, and making people feel that you've done enough will likely reduce the capacity of these restaurants as they get back to business by 60 to 70%, And that'll get into the 50s and the 40s and the 30s as the pandemic wanes and as the risk goes down. But it's a big hit right now, and it's a lot of different things to consider, both from the bar. Many jurisdictions are saying take all the bar seats away and don't use the bar. Many restaurants are using that as a pickup station for their remote delivery and things. But social distancing really does cut the capacity of a dining room by more than half, and it's going to be incredibly difficult for businesses who really make their money on the last 15% of a busy night. That's where the money's made. It's going to be difficult for these people operating at 50% capacity to make any money. We talked a lot with local Main Street managers and bids about, how can you create public spaces that restaurants in your community can use, whether it's a park or a street. Can you close down a street that will allow people to, have additional seating and additional safe seating that that guests, especially in the nicer months, in the warmer weather, the guests will take advantage of and use. And so we're working on a lot of municipalities with this streetery concept, and there's a lot of logistics to be worked out, like ADA and like traffic patterns and like shade and weatherproofing things and making sure they don't blow away and all that. But this is an important thing for restaurants and for local businesses. Even a coffee shop is going to need a staging area that's with social distance waiting. And so it's a very complex little pattern here, but it's important to go through. And it's important to advocate for your businesses in this way, because this, again, will help them keep afloat in the coming months. One of the things that we are seeing and we wanted to highlight is that, about 3 months ago, the #1 reason for choosing a restaurant was taste and flavor and the idea behind the food. Is it Mexican? Is it French? Is it Spanish? Right now, by a large margin, the #1 reason people are choosing a restaurant is cleanliness and sanitation. And so we're advising our partners and businesses to really treat safety and sanitation. Not only do you have to upgrade all of the things that you're doing and go from just cleaning things to now disinfecting them, but also to treat it like a kind of theater where you wear it on your sleeve and you really promote it. Before, changing a table was a quick little thing you didn't want anyone to see. Now it's going to be part of the show, and people are going to see that you're really cleaning it, that you're disinfecting the chairs, that you're using the right equipment and the right sanitizers and all of that. It's going to be a kind of theater now. And there's going to be signage saying all the things that people are doing to keep you safe, and that's a good thing. So we flipped on our heads why people choose restaurants in the coming months, and businesses need to respond to that. So we have a whole host of safety and sanitation guidelines, and there's a ton of stuff in the market about this, so I won't really bore you with all of that. But I will mention that right now, people going to restaurants are scared, and they see restaurants as a bit of a minefield. They're scared of touching the handles, and they're scared of going to the restroom, and they're scared of waiting in a crowded place, and they're scared of buffets and salad bars. And so there's a lot to respond to in this, and understanding how afraid the community is really important. So we looked at a lot of the safety and sanitation guidelines, and again, there's dozens of resources out there, from OSHA to the CDC to the University of California in Irvine did a great handbook. We've culled through all of that in our document that you're welcome to download, and really gotten to what restaurants need to focus on and what is happening in the market now. So the important thing to communicate to everyone is that it's not just about cleaning. Cleaning is making things look good. It's about disinfecting, and it's about preventing the spread of a virus. And so that's a very different way of approaching things, and it's a very different cleaning methodology. As far as new policies and sanitation standards, how you handle your staff and how you treat them is going to be really important, and how you enable them to stay safe during the pandemic in the restaurant world is very, very important, both from their own care and taking care of themselves and their families, but also in a way that they don't spread this virus to 50, 60 people in a given shift because of carelessness and improper handling. And so there's a whole lot of guidelines about how they use PPE and face masks and gloves and things like that, how often the hand washing is, and all the things to keep people safe. And then again, how to keep them safe from guests who are on a spectrum of, I don't really care about this, to I'm terrified about the pandemic. And so there's a whole spectrum of people out there that the businesses have to deal with, and we have some guidelines and some thoughts about how all this works as well. HVAC and moving air across the property is also an important thing for larger restaurants, and just understanding some of it and how to handle it from a safety and sanitation perspective is really important. I'll spend a few minutes talking about messaging and communications. From a social media perspective, we're advising restaurants and bars to get out there and just be who they are, and really activate their social channels and remind people why they love them before the pandemic and why they should come back and support them and be patient with them, and and leverage the business and return to that communal experience as things come back to normal. So we've outlined the kinds of things that they should be posting, and what that should look like, and how they can leverage their staff and the great things that they do already to really continue to engage their community and build their brand. A big, huge, important thing for all of these businesses is going to be signage and communication. Our team has put together, a downloadable sort of sign templates that allow businesses to post the new COVID-19 occupancy, and to talk about all the great things that they're doing to keep people safe from a safety and sanitation perspective, to remind the staff about hand washing and wearing PPE and all that. There's a lot of communication that needs to happen. Also includes things like decals on the floor to show people how to wait in a social distancing sort of manner, how to do pickup. All of these things are things that we've covered in our signage package, and businesses are going to need to deal with as they get back to business. Again, as I mentioned before, what's interesting is that people are expecting to be slightly inconvenienced and are willing to go through that. In fact, they really want to see an effort being made to protect them. And so I think that a lot of things that restaurants and hotels and bars and things would never have done before, they're doing now, and customers are liking, because it shows a real effort. And this also includes saying no to people who do not want to abide by the social distancing rules that your business is put in place. It is absolutely fine, just like no shirt, no shoes, no service. If you want people to wear masks as they walk through the restaurant and you're providing that for them, it's absolutely fine to say no to them if they don't want to play ball. And so we're advising our restaurant partners to be a little bit more stringent, because if you're not, you're going to alienate a lot of guests right now. And again, as things ease and as the pandemic becomes less dangerous and as we find a cure, all of these things will phase out. But for right now, I think people are expecting to, be a little bit inconvenienced, and they're willing to go along with us. Quickly, I'll go over some new business models. And what I wanted to mention was that there's a lot that restaurants are doing. They're incredibly creative business people that we know across the country. Restaurateurs are very scrappy very often, and very smart and very savvy, and they're very creative. And so some of these are ways that these creative restaurateurs have generated some money as they've kind of gotten back into business. But what I did want to mention is that none of these are going to replace all of the pre-COVID-19 revenue. Sometimes we're seeing a lot of these strategies get you 15, 20, 25%. In a great world, 30% of the business that you had before, but it's not going to solve all of it. So we're hoping that a combination of a couple of these strategies, with gently reopening the restaurant facility itself, with maybe some additional seating outside, will create a situation where some of these restaurants can survive. But none of these are a silver bullet. They're all in combination with everything that your communities can do to support them. So a couple of cool things we've seen is really a diversification of businesses, and through things like Curbside Seating. There's a great restaurant group in Washington, D.C. who's converted their restaurants into grocery stores and for curbside pickup. And so we have created these step-by-step guides on how do you do takeout and pickup, and what does that look like, and what does that, how does that work, and how can you get this, and what do you do, and what step by step, and which technology provider should I choose, and all of that. And restaurants who haven't done this before, it's hard, and takeout is hard. There's a lot of things that aren't good when you get it home from takeout. So really thinking through this is important, and we've got some a toolkit of things that we can share with you on how to do this. Delivery is equally hard. Those apps out there are super expensive. We're advising a lot of people to leverage all of their neighbors and social channels and all of their email lists and everything they've got to get people to come to them directly without using these third-party apps, and use the third-party apps as, and also. But deliveries, it can be expensive when we use these apps, and they can really eat into profit margins. So anything you can do to excite your local community and get people, calling you directly and going through your own website to pick things up, that's a key. That's a really important thing. As I mentioned, the grocery option, I want to pick up groceries from a chef who's made a bag of things for me, and they know how to butcher the meat, and they know how to, make sure the fish is fresh. And I'm excited about, even after the pandemic goes, about being able to pick up groceries from a restaurant. I think that's a great new business model. So, restaurants can explore this, and small bodegas and things have done, little prepackaged and pre-ordered, things that people can pick up curbside. It's a great way to go. And then catering, local businesses that are coming back online, all of that is important to go through. And lastly, supporting, all of these ideas and all of these strategies are technology resources, and it's really difficult to sift through those and to understand what's available and how much they cost. And so we've created a brief rundown of all the major technology platforms, from tableside, swiping of credit cards and touch-free payments to, the apps and the different delivery apps and all that. And so we've done a rundown for restaurateurs, to think about some things that they may need to implement to deal with the pandemic on the back end. So that's again, a very high level overview of a very comprehensive document. We're all on my team, we're all career restaurant people. We've all lived and worked in restaurants our entire lives, and it's a horrible time for the community. Again, the restaurant world is a big part of, what the lifeblood of small businesses in America, and they're struggling right now. So anything that your communities and your Main Street managers and bids can do to support them through this process, it will pay back in dividends. And, we're all looking forward to getting back into our favorite pizza place and our favorite Italian restaurant, our favorite Spanish and Chinese food place, and really enjoying our friends and families again. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'll turn it back over to Dion.
Jay, thank you for a comprehensive presentation. Thank you so much. We got a lot of questions coming through here, so I've tried to compile them all as folks are asking questions, and and a lot of these questions are directed to you, Jay. The first question that we have: are you aware of customer service training during COVID-19? So how would a hostess be able to address a family of 4 when they're only supposed to maybe have 2 people that are coming into the restaurant? Have you seen any customer service trainings, or are you guys working on anything?
So not yet. So here's the reality. We did this restaurant bar toolkit. We followed up from Streetsense with a hotel reopening guide, and now we're working on what is customer service, low touch, high impact customer service look like. We're about halfway through that toolkit, but I haven't seen anyone publish anything but a couple of cool ideas. But we'll probably release something like that in the next few weeks, maybe the next 3 or 4 weeks. But it's a tricky situation. We have a lot of thinking on it, and we're advising our clients on it, but I haven't seen anything that's comprehensive and really covers it for restaurants yet, but we're working on it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Another question, and this is from Richard Spalding. He had 2 questions, so I'm just going to include them both. What would you anticipate for bar reopenings, and what will service and seating look like? Since the bar environment is not as formal as a dining room setup. And then I'll just give you a second question. Should we anticipate regulations for touchless restrooms?
Bars are tricky, and I don't think anyone has a good idea. And most of the communities we're seeing that, the phase 1 reopening is really not about bars. And they're, just the idea of a successful bar is elbow to elbow and 3 deep, and that's how they make their money. I think in the summer months you're going to see bars trying to, kind of do beer hall kind of scenarios, or kind of doing mobile things, or ways to pay the rent with using the public spaces within their communities. But really, honestly, until there is a a glimmer of hope from either a contact tracing, or there's enough people that have had the COVID-19, or there's some way to sign up. We're seeing in Asia there's some way to sign off that that you're healthy and can come back in. We're seeing capacity increase in that way. But bars it's really hard because it's a volume business. It's great margins, but it's all about volume, and the check average is low. So shooting seating down in bars to keep everybody 6 feet away is really, really difficult to contend with. So I wish I had a better answer, but it's really tough right now for bars. And then as far as inspections and health department regulations as far as touch-free things, I imagine that there will be additional health department regulations. I think the health departments are reeling from this. They don't know what to do, and they're all sort of trying to come back at what's responsible and what makes sense. I can't imagine that people will require touch-free faucets and things like that just because of the cost and the expense. But I will imagine there will be some way that you can open a bathroom door and sanitize your hands with some sort of touch-free sanitizing stations at the entry or exit of restrooms. I think you should plan for that. But I'm not sure people are going to require people to make that kind of investment, because that's an enormous investment for a lot of businesses, and they may not have the ability to do it right now. So I think we'll see incremental changes in that way.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that. This is a great one from Alicia Gallo. She's one of our Urban Main Street managers. And her question is, Jay, can you provide us with some guidance on reopening trends for restaurants that are not fine dining? So many of our restaurants in our disinvested commercial districts are those hole in a wall is what we would call it, or places that are owned by sole proprietor and operators. How have you worked with them, or how would you suggest the group works with them?
Yeah, I mean, it's these are the most my favorite places in New York are all these little tiny restaurants. We're actually working with a bit in Queens on this specific topic. A lot of what people are able to do is to transition their little tiny restaurants into pickup places to order ahead. Many of them are putting windows in the front where people can roll up to the window and pick up pre-orders. A lot of people are also working with their local grocers or local food retailers and preparing meals for four and things like that. We see this converting your small mom and pop shop or hole in the wall restaurant into a takeout and pickup right now seems to be the most effective strategy. Adding grab and go coolers and things like that, and just making it a place where people don't spend a lot of time and don't sit and eat, because you're never with this kind of social distancing, you're never going to get the kind of volume of people that you can to make any money. So you might as well increase the volume of takeout and pickup and turn it into that kind of business.
Thank you, Jay. I want to be mindful. We have about 5 minutes. The questions are really flowing in, Jay, so this is great. Thank you so much. Here's another one from Alicia, and I think this is great. Does Streetsense have any communication materials, resources about fighting racism, stigma, and helping to promote restaurants? Alicia, I'll just say this, Jay, before you jump in. Alicia, I will just add the National Main Street Center is trying to work on something like that, but I would love to hear from Jay.
We don't, candidly. And what we try to do is we try to provide to our communities and the most devastated communities in this pandemic the tools and resources that we can to be helpful. And a lot of the resources that we have online are designed to help these small businesses recover. But as far as a treatise on systemic racism from the restaurant industry, we have not created anything like that. But we are really focused on, again, as you mentioned, the smaller businesses and the people struggling most with this pandemic.
Thank you. I'm going to lighten it up a bit and switch it to a couple of questions that have came in from Sanjeev. Sanjeev had questions about the sandwich boards, specials, for popular items work, particularly since there are limited menus and touchscreen menus that you mentioned a little bit earlier in your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, again, restaurants are so creative. Yes, market the heck out of whatever you have. Focus on your high margin items. If your municipality will let you do sandwich boards, anything that lets people know I'm open and I want your business is great. Activating your social channels, and then we're all about advocating for order ahead technology. Even if you have some seating that you can use, if people can order ahead and they can just pick it up and sit down in front of your restaurant, that's great too. It's just going to increase your flow through. It's a whole new game out there. So anything you can do, I think all of those are great things to do.
Thank you, Jay. And two more questions. This one is from John. One is saying, thank you so much. This is such a fantastic webinar. But he wanted to know whether or not could he post Streetsense's toolkit on their website, since the presentation slides are labeled as proprietary and confidential. Does that also apply to the toolkit?
We can send out, and Dion, I can give this to you, the link to, you're welcome to post the link to our Streetsense website. People have to give their email address and whatever, but that should be pretty easy. But yeah, we have a whole bunch of other tools and resources there, for bids and for local communities. We'd love you to post the link on your website, of course.
That's amazing, Jay. And final question, this is from Andrea. Please create a toolkit for retailers. This was an incredible resource and this webinar was fantastic. I'm sure Streetsense may have a toolkit already for your retailers, or you may be working on it. Do you?
Yes and no. So we're a joint venture with a company called CBRE, which is a very large real estate brokerage company, and they own half of Streetsense. Their retail team put together a sort of larger scale resource for things like Target and Walmart and things. But there's a lot of guides that people are using from them. There's a lot of guidance that they've published on how retail is going to come back, and a lot of studies and data and best practices. So I would look on the CBRE website for those resources. I know that we're working on a number of retail projects, but we have yet to publish this yet. And I'm a simple country restaurant guy, so I focused on this first. But it's something that the industry definitely needs, and I know that we're working on it through CBRE and to some degree Streetsense, and we'll keep you updated if we publish anything online.
Thank you, Jay. Jay, this presentation has been fantastic. The questions are still coming in, but I do want to be thoughtful that we said that we would end the presentation at noon. Guys, please feel free to follow up directly with Jay or myself or Kelly with some of your questions that you have. I think we all would be willing to either try to help you or refer you to the Streetsense team. I'm so happy that you were able to join us today, Jay. This was a great presentation.
And again, if you want to, Dion, I don't know if you want to forward me all the questions. If you have the respondent's email, I can just shoot them notes and things if I can be helpful, but I'm happy to follow up in that way.
Great. We can definitely do that. Thank you. Kelly, should I turn it back over to you?
I'll just close it out by saying thanks, everyone, and please anticipate a recording available on Main Street America's webpage by tomorrow, along with the link again to download the toolkit as Jay has suggested. So we appreciate your attention today, and we'll see you next time. And have a great day, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, Kelly.
all.
Goodbye.
Everyone.
Bye.